Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, or good wherever you are. Welcome to OWASP Ottawa's August meetup, where we're really excited because we're going to learn about a new tool today. We're going to learn about OWASP's Nettacker, and I'll apologize profusely in advance if I'm pronouncing this wrong. We're very fortunate to have our OWASP colleague, OWASP London chapter leader and Nettacker project lead, Sam Stepanyan, with us this evening. And Sam is going to bring with us, or to us, his 20 years of experience in the IT industry with his background in software engineering and web application development. So his being a SME in WAFs and SEAM will help guide us through the use of Nettacker and Recon. So with that, and with no more ado, welcome, Sam.
Hi, Garth. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone watching. Pleased to be here. Right, let me just share my screen now and see if I can start the presentation. Okay. I hope everyone can see my screen. Welcome to my talk, using OWASP Nettacker project for Recon and vulnerability scanning. My name is Sam Stepanyan. I'm OWASP London chapter leader, and I'm on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter using handle SecureStep9. I tweet a lot of information about application security generally and some news about cybersecurity. So if you're not following me yet, please do give me a follow, as you hopefully will be able to learn something new through my tweets. Quickly about me again, as I mentioned, I'm OWASP London chapter leader. I also lead OWASP chapter committee, and OWASP chapter committee is a committee which was created to help all OWASP chapters all around the world to succeed, to be healthy, to make sure they have all the necessary tools and resources and all the necessary support from the community. It is formed of experienced OWASP chapter leads. So if you are an OWASP chapter leader, do check out some of the resources that we have available. I'm an ex-developer myself. I come from software development background. I work as an independent application security consultant in financial services in the city of London in the UK. So I am an application security guy and I am a defender. So why am I presenting a talk about a tool which consists of words network and attacker? So my story with Nettacker is quite interesting because I first tried Nettacker in 2017 when it was just launched. I saw it on a list of projects which were new at in OWASP in 2017. I said, okay, let me give it a go. What is this Nettacker stuff? So I downloaded it. I figured out it's written in Python. I tried to running it. It displayed a whole bunch of options. I couldn't really figure out what it's doing, and I forgot about it for probably a year and a half. However, in 2018, I received an email from the leaders of Nettacker project, and they said, "Oh, Sam, we are supposed to be presenting OWASP Nettacker at BlackArch Europe 2018 in London, and unfortunately, we cannot get to London in time. Can you please present Nettacker at BlackArch in London?" And I'm like, "Yes, of course, I will be happy to help." Fellow OWASP project leaders. Unfortunately, I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing about this tool. And I said, okay, I'm happy to help. But what do I present? I know nothing about this tool. I will not be able to answer any questions. And I was told, don't worry, we're gonna get you on a Zoom session. So myself and my chapter colleague at the time, Dr. Greg Fracos, we learned this tool overnight on a Zoom session. And the next morning, we went to BlackArch Europe 2018 conference. And then suddenly this thing happened. We had huge crowd of people gathering around our stand at the Arsenal track. All all checking out Nettacker, asking us lots of questions. The people in the crowd who were penetration testers, security researchers, bug bounty hunters, application and network security consultants, some senior managers as well. They were all quite interested in this project. They loved it. And we said, okay, we love this tool as well. So I became a co-leader of the project because I absolutely love the tool. It was very, very handy and helped me a lot. You never know, I'm an AppSec guy. I started using a tool consisting of words network and attacker, and I'll explain to you how it actually relates to AppSec a little bit later. So in 2019, we decided to get back to Black Hat Europe conference, and then this happened. We had even bigger crowds gathering, watching the demo, and again, it was just unprecedented. I couldn't understand why, because there are lots of other quite good tools presented at Black Hat, but somehow people found out about the tool and they all came to check it out. So what is OWASP Nettacker? Why is it so popular, and why do penetration testers love it? Right, so OWASP Nettacker is an open source software tool, just like all OWASP projects. And this tool was built to assist with penetration testing by automating information gathering and vulnerability scanning tasks. The tool is written in Python, so it can run on Windows, on Linux, on macOS, and generally almost anything which runs Python. I did run it on Raspberry Pi, and it worked absolutely fine, which is fantastic. And of course, the biggest advantage of this tool is that it is written 100% in Python. It does not use or call any other tools. And this is its biggest, let's say, unique selling point compared with other similar tools. Another very important thing to mention about Nettacker is that it is a project which is supported by Google Summer of Code initiative. If you don't know what Google Summer of Code is, it is an initiative by Google which invites students from all over the world to work on an open source project during their summer break. And that is basically a paid internship by Google. And we were quite lucky that quite a few students over the past 3 years worked on Nettacker and helped the project to get where it is now. But you can say that Nettacker was essentially written by students who spent their summer breaks working on this tool. Google Summer of Code is a great initiative, and OWASP participates in this initiative almost every single year. And again, if you know a student, or if you are a student yourself, it's a great project to check out, and you need to apply. So basically you have to write, as a student, you need to write an essay why you want to work on a particular open source project, why you like it, and how you propose to improve it, enhance it. And then these proposals, they get reviewed and the students get chosen, and Google allocates slots, because obviously for each project, and then students start working on it. So it's an absolutely fantastic initiative. This year it's finishing now because it's almost the end of summer, but next year, if you're a student or if you know a student, make sure you apply in March, because that's when the application forms will be accepted. Okay, so Nettacker is a Swiss Army knife kind of tool. So what is a Swiss Army knife? It is a tool consisting of many tools which are not necessarily compatible with each other, but can they all be used together? This is the hidden trick of Nettacker. So Nettacker, just like a Swiss Army knife, it's a collection of tools. It has modules, it has module structure. So each module is basically a blade that you can pull out from a knife. It is relatively easy to create your own modules if you know Python, if you'd like to enhance it. It's a fast performing tool. It's using Python multi-threading that you can control. Another important thing, that it has customizable profiles, which are basically bundles of modules focused on a specific task. So this is how you can actually use several blades of your Swiss Army knife, several modules together to perform a specific task, right? For example, whether that's information gathering, whether that's vulnerability scanning, or whether that's something else. And I'll talk about this in a minute. And of course, the greatest advantage is that you can automate it and you can run it from command line. So few caveats. OWASP Nettacker, it is not officially released yet. As I mentioned, it's a tool written by students and enhanced by collaborators. It's an open source tool, so you can collaborate and help in improving this tool as well. It is not even in beta kind of phase. Its current version is 0.02, so it's always looking for more contributors. However, this tool is great because it is functional and it already has a command line interface. It has a web user interface. It has an API. It has a report generator. It has Maltego transforms, and it has currently over 70 modules. Where do you find Nettacker? Nettacker can be found on OWASP.org. It has its own page where you will find links to its documentation, its code repository, how to contribute, and a couple of quick demo screenshots of what it does. The documentation is actually located on GitHub Wiki. So I know not many projects on GitHub use the wiki feature, but we do. So basically, when you open the project source code on GitHub, just click it on the wiki button, and this is where all the documentation is. You will find the table of contents on the right-hand side. There's a big arrow pointing towards the installation section of Nettacker. So you can learn how to install it, which is probably the first thing you'd want to do. Before we proceed, I would like to explain the difference between Nettacker and some other well-known scanners, such as Burp Suite or OWASP Zap. So scanners such as Burp Suite or OWASP Zap, they scan one website for many web application vulnerabilities, and that's whatever the scanner is able to find on just one website. And basically these tools, they crawl the website to discover all URLs, all forms, all buttons, all parameters of the forms, all the scripts, all the resources, and of course then tries to exploit them to discover vulnerabilities. Nettacker works differently. It scans one or many, and that can be hundreds or thousands, IP addresses, networks, or subdomains for open ports, and one or more specific vulnerabilities which are listed by the user or bundled in modules. So basically, that is your Swiss Army knife blade that you want to pull out, and you can use it on thousands of websites, IP addresses, on networks if you want to. That is the main feature of Nettacker, and that's why it's such a great tool that many people love. Before we proceed any further, I would like to remind you that OWASP Nettacker is actually an offensive security tool. This is probably quite a unique tool because there aren't that many offensive security tools or tools in the breaker category at OWASP, and this tool is. So responsible use warning: you shall not misuse this tool nor any other security tool for unauthorized access. And the reminder that performing security scans without permission from the owner of the computer system is illegal. So in order for you to understand Nettacker a little bit easier, because remember I showed you the slide at the beginning with lots of modules that we had inside Nettacker. It is actually quite simple. So Nettacker consists of modules. Currently there are 72 modules, I think, well, over 70 modules, and they are all split into 3 categories. What can Nettacker do? It has modules of type scan, for example, port scan, so it can scan for ports, scan for something, gather information. It has modules of type vuln or vulnerability scanning modules. For example, Apache Struts vuln will try to discover if there is an Apache Struts vulnerability on the target. And it has a module of type brute for brute forcing. For example, SSH brute module will try to brute force the target or targets using SSH protocol. So that's essentially what Nettacker is. It's a collection of modules of 3 different types. You scan for something like port scan, you check for vulnerability, or you brute force. So this is one, again, a unique feature of Nettacker, because essentially it combines 3 different types of tools into one tool written entirely in Python. So briefly about some of Nettacker scan modules. There are quite a lot of them, so I'm not going to go through all of them. However, I placed asterisk next to some of them just to bring your attention to them so you can understand what Nettacker does. So admin scan module scans the target for any administrative control panels or admin type folders. And it has basically a dictionary of different software leaving admin pages. Again, why is it done? Because obviously a lot of software which leaves this admin panel, sometimes they don't have the authentication properly configured, or they have default credentials. So that will make it easy to exploit. CMS detection scan is a scan which tries to detect content management systems. So Nettacker tries to detect WordPress, Joomla, and Drupal as the world's 3 most popular content management systems. Another module is directory scan for directory brute forcing. Some of you might know a OWASP project called Deerbuster, right? And this is very similar, but it's written in Python. Again, that has a dictionary, and it tries to find some of the folders that the developers might leave on the target server. So this could be stuff like CGI bin scripts, for example. Again, some of the administrative stuff, but also things like .git or .svn subversion folders where which attackers can exploit to access the source code, source versioning system. And again, why it is dangerous is because, of course, attackers will be able to access the source code of the website, discovering some of the stuff which can be hidden there, including configuration files, credentials, secrets, and things like that. Another module, just want to briefly tell you about this, ICMP scan. It's a module which basically pings your network and checks for responses. Again, it's useful to determine what responds to pings on your network. PMA scan is another cool module that a lot of people use. PMA stands for PHP-MyAdmin. So PHP-MyAdmin is a very popular free and open source tool for managing MySQL databases, and a lot of people have it installed on their web servers without any protection or with using default credentials. And again, if that is can be discovered on the target, that's how attackers can hack into your website. And that's why attacker helps you discover it. Port scan is what it says on the tin. It just performs port scans, very similar to Nmap. Subdomain scan is a great module. So this is your subdomain discovery, subdomain enumeration module, which is very cool, very quick. It's not as comprehensive as OWASP Amasis one, but it still does the job very, very nicely. And I like it a lot. And subdomain scan is one of the core features of Nettacker, because you can combine subdomain scans with all other modules, which makes it absolutely a great feature for Nettacker. Another great scanning module is Wapalizer. So if you don't know, Wapalizer is a tool which allows you to discover what is running on the target server, what kind of technologies, what kind of programming languages, what kind of frameworks. And again, you can use it in bulk by just applying Wapalizer scan to your network. WordPress version scan, again, allows you to discover different versions of WordPress that you're running. There's some scans for WordPress plugins, WordPress themes, WordPress Theme Thumbs plugin, because it had lots of vulnerabilities in the past, and an interesting module called WordPress user enumeration scan, which allows you to discover all the users on a target system if they're running WordPress. The next bunch of modules is about vulnerability scanning, and there are quite a lot of them. Then not going to go through them. It doesn't cover all the CVEs. However, there are some important ones like Apache Struts, FTPD, clickjacking. I will be talking about, for example, Citrix CVE, Heartbleed. It's just some of the vulnerability modules available. Some of the vulnerability modules that I will be showcasing and I want to bring your attention to is server version vuln. So this is a module which tries to discover a vulnerability of the target web server leaking the server version in the server banner. The next one is SSL certificate expired vulnerability. That is another great module which allows you to scan your network and find all the servers with expired SSL certificates. Why is this important? Because if your network has servers with expired SSL certificates on the servers, that means these servers are most probably abandoned. And if you have a server which your IT department has abandoned, it's quite likely that they've also stopped patching it as well. And if you have an unpatched server on your network, well, you know what that leads to. Data breach potentially. So that is why this is a very important module, and I use it a lot in my own work. And also for bug bounty hunting as well. This is quite a cool thing to have. And another one I want to bring your attention to is X-Powered by Vuln. Again, this is working usually in tandem with server version Vuln. Again, that checks if your target web server is leaking its technologies in the X-Powered by header. Again, a lot of web servers will show the version number of the particular technology, for example, a version of PHP, a version of ASP.NET, or whatever technology they're using. And yeah, it will, of course, well, it will help attackers to target specific vulnerabilities and exploits if you don't disable this. Of course, Nettacker helps you discover these kind of vulnerabilities. And last but not least is Nettacker brute force modules. So Nettacker is a unique tool because it allows you to combine brute forcing with all the other modules that you've seen. There are currently 8 brute forcing modules available inside Nettacker. So you can brute force using FTP protocol. You can run brute forcing attacks using HTTP basing auth. You can also brute force using HTTP form, which is probably the most popular authentication method out there. It's just basically a web form with a username and password on the page. So you can brute force these and say check for default credentials. HTTP NTLM brute will also try to brute force using HTTP NTLM. SMTP, of course, will try to brute force your using SMTP protocol and try to find the credentials which work using SMTP. SSH brute is, of course, using SSH protocol. Telnet, if you're still using Telnet, that can be brute forced. Another very interesting brute forcing module is WordPress XML RPC brute forcing. So if you have any websites which run WordPress, Nettacker can actually try to brute force user accounts using WordPress's built-in XML RPC endpoint. IoT scanning. So originally Nettacker was called IoT Scan. It's still its Twitter handle. And when it was created originally, the authors of Nettacker tool thought of it of a tool to scan the network for Internet of Things devices, and then do things like scan IoT devices for open ports and brute force scan for default credentials such as admin. This is actually true because I have actually used Nettacker for IoT tab scanning. One of my clients was a large enterprise which had lots of cameras all around their offices. And they had no idea that some of these cameras had default credentials, admin. That was literally the default credentials on the cameras. So I used Nettacker to scan all the network ranges to discover these CCTV cameras and then discover those which had default credentials. And of course, that was very dangerous because any attackers could have just connected to these cameras and started watching the offices and the premises is using weak credentials. So it's important to understand why Nettacker's Twitter handle is still called IoT Scan. Nettacker Port Scan is probably the most popular module. You can just use it by calling Port Scan. A lot of people ask me about Nettacker and Nmap. Yeah, so Nettacker Supports Scan, I think it's much easier to use and faster compared with Nmap. Of course, I use Nmap as a security consultant myself, and I'm pretty sure people in the audience are probably using Nmap as well. They have used it in the past, but people usually tend to have their sort of love and hate relationship with Nmap. But I can honestly say that I've stopped using Nmap completely since I started using Nettacker, because it's just so much easier to use. I understand. I can never remember any of the Nmaps options, trying to download scripts, and with Nettacker port scan, it's just simple. You can just say, I want to do a port scan, and I want it to be multi-threaded, so you can add to speed it up, so I can add multiple threads and threads per host. This is all under user's control. And by default, Nettacker's port scan module will only scan 1,000 most popular ports, which is very similar to Nmap. However, you can limit and list specific ports that you would like to scan using -g parameter. And you can define a list of ports using a comma separated list, like 80,443 if you just want to scan ports 80 or 443, or you can list them using a dash, so define a range. So how do you run Nettacker? Okay, running Nettacker 101, the thing which I didn't understand back in 2017 when I tried Nettacker for the first time, and I just closed it. I couldn't understand what to do, because it when you run it, it just shows a whole bunch of usage options. But what do you actually need to run it? And actually, you need to have two things to run Nettacker. You need to define a target, what you are about to scan, using -i command line switch, and then the module that you want to scan it with using -m. Again, there is a bit of inconsistency in documentation. Sometimes it's called method, sometimes it's called module, but these terms are interchangeable. So basically, whenever I say method, it's the same as Nettacker module. So for example, if I want to perform a port scan on IP address 192.168.1.149, I just call Nettacker with -i, and that is my target, and that's the module I would like to use. I can also scan the whole network by defining its CIDR range. Again, the word net in Nettacker stands for network. It's a network attacker. And you can define not just a single IP address, you can define lots of other targets. Which targets Nettacker supports? Nettacker supports a single IP address, so as a target. It can also attack a range of IP addresses if you define a start IP address and end IP address like this. As we've seen already, it can also support the CIDR notation, where you can define the IP address with /bits. It also takes a domain name as a parameter, as a target, or a specific URL, which can be the HTTP or HTTPS protocol. So you can see how rich Nettacker is and how many different targets it supports. So yes, you can scan just one IP address or one website, or you can scan thousands. How do you define them if you want to scan lots of targets? Nettacker allows you to load the list of targets from a text file. So another way how you can run it, you can just create a text file where you put a target on each line of that text file, and you just load it with -l parameter. Again, this is very easy to remember. And again, modern companies will probably have lots of networks, lots of IP addresses and ranges, lots of domains that they own. And yeah, if you want to scan them all with Nettacker, you can just create a text file and just load it using -l parameter, and then apply any module you want. Of course, the great thing about Nettacker is that you can pull several modules at once. You can use several blades of your Swiss Army knife. If you want to use multiple methods or multiple modules, you just list them with a comma. And for example, if you want to run a port scan and phpMyAdmin scan on 192.161.149 IP address, that's what you do. You just list your modules using a comma. And for example, if you want to scan an OWASP.org domain to perform a subdomain scan and check for server version vulnerability, you just list them with a comma. I will show this all to you when I'm going to live demo the tool to you in a few minutes. Another cool thing about Nettacker, as I mentioned, is things called profiles. Because Nettacker has over 70 modules, you can actually bundle them, and there are pre-configured bundles which are available with Nettacker. There is a profile called info, which is for all the information gathering modules. There is a profile called scan, which is basically all the scanning modules. There is a bundle called brute, which combines all the brute forcing modules. And there's a profile called vuln, which basically has all the vulnerability scanning modules. It also has a profile called WP for WordPress. So that bundles together all the WordPress related modules. A profile called Joomla, and of course a magical profile called all. That means it's going to use absolutely all modules available. And if you're going to use all, there is also a command line option available for you to exclude some of the options, which is again quite useful if you want to use all modules but exclude some of them which do not make sense. And again, if you want to run Nettacker with a profile, again, from the command line, you just define your target, again, using -i or -l if you're loading a list, and then you just use -- profile and the name of the profile. So all the command line options that Nettacker has, it's quite difficult to remember them all. So that's why Nettacker also has a wizard mod, and you can just call it using -w command line switch, and that was basically is going to ask you lots of questions. So it's going to ask you, please enter the target, and you can define the target, how many threads you want to use, how many thread numbers per host you want to use, which file name do you want to put your report in, and basically you can just go through all these questions until Nettacker starts working. Okay, so how do you install Nettacker? I'm not going to go through it in detail. All the instructions are available on GitHub. It is a software written in Python, so please do install dependencies first. Please do read the manual, because there are some libraries that you need to install, such as SSL libraries and some libraries for curl. But once these are available in your operating system, you can just do a git clone from GitHub. So the git clone github.com/OWASP/Nettacker, then change directory into Nettacker folder and run the Python's pip install command to install all the Python dependencies from the requirements.txt file. So that's basically what it is. But do definitely check the documentation. Installing it in Kali Linux, I have recorded a video which is available on YouTube, how to install OWASP Nettacker on Kali Linux. If you watch it and also follow the steps in the description of the video, you will be able to install it in Kali Linux. And I'm actually going to demo right now the tool live to you in Kali Linux. However, it's not just Kali Linux. Literally 2 days ago, I found out that the team behind BlackArch Linux distribution, and BlackArch is a Linux distribution which is targeted at penetration testers, and it has lots of tools. There was an announcement that they now include Nettacker, and there you go. If you look at the list of tools which are now bundled with BlackArch Linux, you can see Nettacker is there, and that's our version 002 release available there. And I tried it, and I'm going to try to show it live to you as well. BlackArch Linux is a quite an awesome looking distribution with lots of tools bundled. And yes, Nettacker is there. As you can see, I managed to launch it, and it worked. Right. Let me now switch to my Kali Linux and do a live demo. Right, okay, here's my virtual machine running Kali Linux, where I already have Nettacker installed. So there you go, it is in my folder called Nettacker. If I list the contents, you will see there's some files in Python. Of course, the main file here is nettacker.py. So to run it, you can run it with Python 2 or Python 3. So Nettacker supports both the current version. However, the future version of Nettacker will no longer support Python 2. So there you go. I'm just going to run Nettacker with no parameters and Python 2. We get some warnings that Python 2 is now deprecated, but here's lots of options that Nettacker displays by default if you don't define any parameters, and that's why I got confused. And there you go. You can see there's some warning that Python 2 is no longer supported by the Python core team. But we can also launch it with Python 3, and it is still working, and this time without any warnings. Right. So don't be confused. As I showed you before, all you need to do to run Nettacker is you have to define two parameters. Right. Let me use Python 3. So you need to define -i, which is your target, and you need to define -m for the module. So let me first show you a port scan. I've got another virtual machine running here with this IP address. So I'm going to show you how to do port scan on it. So this is the simplest thing to do. Same what you would do with Nmap, but you can see how easy it is. Say, well, that's my target. Let's do a port scan. So when the attacker starts, it shows the shows its version number. You can see here 002 says Nettacker engine started, checks that if you're on the latest version, shows you how many modules it has loaded. So it has 72 modules. Tells you that the target was submitted into the engine, and these are all the ports that it discovered. And as you can see, it displays this table as an output, and it's quite a nice structured format. So host is obviously the discovered host IP address or FQDN. This case, we only had one host as a target. Username and password columns are currently blank. And the reason for that, because these are used for brute forcing. So when you brute force your credentials, and Nettacker actually finds a combination of username and password that it used to successfully authenticate to the target, they will be displayed here. Port is a port number. Type is basically the type of module which was used. So this is basically the name of the module. In description, different modules put different things. So port scan puts the signature of the port, and here it says, okay, 23 looks like it's running telnet, 111 is Sun RPC, 22 is SSH. But look, for example, it found open ports 8090 and 8084 on the target, but it tells us that it is actually running that there is HTTP protocol which is running on these open ports, which is quite useful. Nettacker currently doesn't have signatures for many services, so it's not as rich as Nmap, but it supports the most frequently used ones. So why is this useful? For example, like here, if you have a web server running on some obscure port, or for example, if you had SSH running on port 2222 instead of just 22, it will tell you that it is actually running SSH. So this is how quick and easy you can do port scan. But let me show you now something a little bit cooler. Okay. So one of the things that Nettacker is great at is subdomain enumeration. So let's do a subdomain scan of OWASP.org. Again, before proceeding, I have to warn you that I have permission to scan OWASP.org because OWASP.org participates in the bug bounty and program, and is specifically allowing security researchers to perform scans on the domain and on the assets owned by OWASP. However, do not use it on the targets for which you don't have permission. Always check. And of course, the idea of Nettacker is that you would use it on your own network. And this is an example. Why would you use it, for example, on your own organization domain? Well, I will show it to you on the OWASP.org example. So I want to call a subdomain scan module. So what this will do, this will say, okay, we have OWASP.org as a domain. You can see how quickly Nettacker found all the subdomains of OWASP.org. And you can see that it put them all under the description folder. So you can see these are all the subdomains of OWASP.org that it managed to discover. However, that is not all, because Nettacker is not just the subdomain scan is not just the subdomain enumeration module. It is also embedded in the core of Nettacker, and you can combine subdomain scan with any other module that you have. So I'm going to show you on a module called server version vuln. So server version vuln, if you remember, this was a module which is checking if the target website is putting a server banner in the response, leaking the version of the linking the type of the web server in use. So if I use it like that, right, with no extra parameters, you will see that it returns very quickly and says, okay, OWASP.org server version vuln is discovered a web server running on port 80 and on port 443, and the description was Cloudflare. Okay, but that is just one host, one target, OWASP.org. What we can do now, we can actually tell Nettacker to go and discover the server version vulnerability on all the subdomains of OWASP.org, because of course Nettacker knows how to discover subdomains. So to do this, we just need to add -s as a switch for subdomain. And now if we run Nettacker, what it's going to do, it's going to discover all the subdomains, and you can see then it's going to connect to every single subdomain, and is going to check what is running, what the vulnerability of the server banner leak. As you can see, there are lots of information coming here already. We can see that different subdomains are running different type of software. We can see some version numbers here. For example, this is 119.3.1 of Atlassian proxy. Okay, and now I'm going to combine another module with it, because remember, with Nettacker we can combine several modules if we want to. So because it's a very useful thing to have, I'm going to add the X powered by vuln as well. And again, if I run this command basically says on the target, which is OWASP.org domain, for all subdomains of OWASP.org, please check and scan the server version banner and X powered by banner. And yeah, if we run this now, Nettacker is going to run 2 modules on the target. And again, you can add as many modules as you want, or you can use a profile. And again, there's a pre-built profiles, or you can create your own if you are using some of the combinations quite frequently. Right. Okay, so we have our output in text format, but that is not all, because okay, I run it now. What is the usefulness of this information? The great thing about Nettacker is that it generates reports, and you can see that after Nettacker scans finished, it tells us that the report was saved in this HTML file. Okay, so that has the date and time and the database. So it's very important that every single scan that Nettacker makes is actually stored in the database, and you can retrieve the scan results later, and you can search those results. And I'll show you how to do this a little bit later when I talk about API. So let's have a look what's inside this HTML file. Okay, let me copy that file into my clipboard and open a web browser, which is a Firefox on Kali Linux. And we'll see what is in this report. Right, I'm just going to paste this file. And lo and behold, this is the report. And you can see there's something awesome, something called penetration testing graph. I can zoom in and zoom out, and you can see it's a very useful information. So it tells us it started the attack. Then it shows that all the targets that it connected to. So there's Austin, Brainbreak, Call to Battle. These are all the subdomains. And you can see that it ran 2 modules on them, and these modules discovered 2 results, one for each open port, right? So that's port 443, port 80 opened, right? And these are the descriptions. So you can see what was actually running on these ports, right? So this is very, very, very cool feature. You can see it's very useful. You can actually choose different graphs. I will talk about this a little bit later. That is very cool. So you can see, for example, one interesting thing in the picture here. You see secure flag OWASP.org. You see straight away from this diagram did not have X powered by leakage. So it only had the only vulnerability which was present was server version vuln, but it did not disclose the X-powered by header. So we can actually see that this was Nginx. If we scroll down, we will see all the results in a nice HTML table now. There's a little bit of a visual effect if I hover my mouse over a particular row, for example, this one, to bring your attention and focus you on this particular row of data, you will see that everything else gets blurred. And you can see that contact.owasp.org 443 was running Atlassian proxy, and that was the version number. So this is a very, very cool report that Nettacker produces, and these graphs are quite useful. So you can see already how useful this feature is. Now let me switch back to the presentation because I want to talk to you about this a little bit more in detail. So we've seen that Nettacker has this cool feature of graphs, which are available inside the HTML report. The reports are usually saved in the results folder with a timestamp, and there are 3 different types of graphs available: the D33, V1, and V2 graphs. And there's also a circular graph, which basically shows circles rather than trees. It might be useful for some of the scans if you want to see kind of a star-shaped diagram rather than a tree-shaped diagram. So this is for HTML reports. However, why Nettacker is great for automation, because it also has output in JSON and CSV. And if you want to generate your report in JSON format, you can just define the -O command line switch O for output, and then you can just define the name of the output file. And if you use .json extension, it will generate the JSON file. And if you use .csv, it will generate the CSV file. And of course, by default, the output is text. You can also generate reports in text format, and it will look like this. It will be like an ASCII text table. And this is the example of the JSON report. Again, why JSON is useful, because JSON is, of course, structured data, and that means that you can integrate the results from Nettacker scans with other security tools because it's in structured format. But why is CSV so useful? Because it gives us a spreadsheet, and it is a manager's dream, because you run a free and open source tool from OWASP on your network, and you get the scan results in a spreadsheet format, which is absolutely fantastic. I don't know any other tool which does that. For example, Nmap itself only produces an XML report. Basically, try to get that out of any security tool. I don't think you will be able to do it. And this is, of course, the beauty of OWASP Nettacker, because what it solves a very important application security problem as well. And what is that application security problem? That is something called OWASP A0. So what is OWASP A0? OWASP A0 was an entry in OWASP top 10 proposed by Jeremiah Grossman. Jeremiah Grossman is a very famous application security expert, and of course an OWASP guy, and the founder of White Hat Security, which of course pioneered application security probably 20 years ago. And back in 2017, he tweeted at the time when OWASP top 10 2017 was being considered, and he said, "I suggest that OWASP top 10 2017 includes A0 asset inventory, because these days the biggest AppSec risk are websites you don't know you own." Why is that? And obviously there are lots of comments under this tweet, and people saying, yeah, every single organization I go to, and the first question I ask, can you give me a list of all your assets, the list of all the websites you own? And usually the answer you get is, I don't know. Right? People, you just don't know what they own. And why is this a problem? Because if you don't know what you own, you cannot possibly secure it. That is the main issue. So with Nettacker, you have a spreadsheet, and I'm going to show this to you. So the same result that you're seeing now, I'm going to rerun the same scan, right, on owasp.org, and I'm going to add -O for output, and I'm just going to call it report -OWASP. and I'm going to put it .csv. Okay, so now Nettacker is going to repeat the same scan, but you can see something's changed here. There was a note saying to use a graph feature, you must use HTML. And yeah, of course, in CSV, which is a comma separated value spreadsheet, you don't get a chance to embed any picture. You can see now the output here is different because we got a message saying report was saved in report-OWASP CSV and the database. Okay, so let's have a look at this report OWASP.csv. I have LibreOffice, which is of course a free and open source Office software. In this case, I run it in Kali Linux, and I'm going to use Calc, which is basically a spreadsheet system similar to Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to open the report-OWASP.csv, right? Okay, and LibreOffice will now load, will tell us that it's about to import the CSV file. I'll say, yeah, okay, fine with default settings. And lo and behold, we got a spreadsheet of all web assets of OWASP.org organization. You will see that a couple of extra columns here. You will see a scan ID. So scan ID is a unique scan ID, which is generated for each scan. Again, why it's useful, because then you can identify a particular scan and find all the assets which were discovered and all the vulnerabilities and all the hits basically inside that scan. For now, I'm just going to delete it because it's no use for us here. Let's say I'm a manager of OWASP organization and I want to know what subdomains we have and on which ports are open and what is running there. Again, username and password, as I mentioned before, these are standard columns that Nettacker adds in its output, and these are used for brute forcing. I'll show you how they're used a little bit later. Okay, port is of course the port number, and then we have the type. This is the type of the module. There's a timestamp. Again, it's useful if you want to know when something was discovered. I can probably go and delete this for now. The description is another important one because we can see what was put by a particular module here in the description field. So what is great about having a spreadsheet, right? It's because you can filter it. So let's go and filter it. And for example, now, because I have a filter, I can go and say, okay, show me all assets which have port 80 open. There you go. And I can go and see all the assets of the organization which have port 80 open. I can now go and say, okay, show me all the assets which were running Nginx. How do I do this? I can just go and filter by Nginx here, or I can, of course, just select Nginx in the filter here. There you go, and I'll be able to see that the secure flag is running Nginx. Which hosts were running Atlassian proxy? Do you remember? Okay, let's try running this, and you can see this is OCMS, OWASP.org, and contact.owas.org. They were running Atlassian proxy, and you can see the version number. So this is why this is so cool, and why Nettacker is such a unique tool, because you can get the spreadsheet format of all your assets. But this is not just assets, right? Because the modules is the vulnerability, right? And you can go and filter by a specific vulnerability. So if you want to see just those assets on which there was a hit by expired by vulnerability, I can just filter it and I can see them all. Because the way how Nettacker produces the report, basically, it runs the module. And basically, if this module produces an output, and again, sometimes that output can be produced on several ports, if there are several ports open, right, it will just add it to the report. And why it's great because you can filter by it. And if something is on the report, it's vulnerable. Something is not on the report, it's not vulnerable. And if something is there, you can just simply find it like this. And that's why it is very, very, very cool and a very unique tool for OWASP and generally in open source. And if you, for example, if your organization is struggling to find a scanner, struggling to identify its assets, Nettacker is absolutely fantastic for doing that. I'm going to show you a few more examples of the assets and modules a little bit later in my presentation. Let me just now quickly show you. Let's see if I can just pause my Kali Linux for a minute, and I'm going to try to run BlackArch Linux. So BlackArch distribution, as I mentioned, is quite a popular penetration testing distribution of Linux, which is based on Arch Linux. I haven't used it myself for about 6 years, and I only loaded it yesterday just to check if it is actually, how does it work with Nettacker. There you go, that's your BlackArch Linux, which is quite a cool looking distribution. But you can see here, Nettacker, again, you don't need to run it with, let's say, Python like I did it on the clone version in Kali, because it is actually there already. So you can just type Nettacker on the command line, and you can see it works here very nicely. And it is included in the distribution. And I can actually use Nettacker in the same way how I used it in Kali, by defining -i parameter. And again, if we want to do our scan on OWASP.org, I can just go and choose a particular module. Let's look at the, well, not server version. Well, let's do a subdomain scan. Subdomain scan. Will it work, BlackArch? There you go. It's launching, and there you go. All the results can be seen here on the BlackArch Linux. You don't need to install anything because it is already there. That's why it's quite cool. New addition. Again, thanks very much to all BlackArch Linux maintainers who added the tool and integrated it into their latest distribution, which is available to download right now. Okay, let me now switch to Kali Linux, because the next thing I'm going to talk about is going to be web UI and API. So Nettacker has an API and a web user interface as well. And to use this feature, it is very, very simple. All you have to do, you just have to start Nettacker with --start API option. You can define API host and API port. So this is basically the host name or IP address where you want the API server to run. By default, Nettacker API will run on your local host, and the port number is 5000. You can also define an API access key. If you don't do it, it will generate one randomly for you. You can also define things like API client whitelists. Again, why it's important: if you're running Nettacker and web UI or API mode in your organization using a VM or a Docker container, probably you don't want your entire company to connect to it, and you want to limit just your security team to be able to access the web UI of Nettacker. There are a few other options available here that you can use. The important thing to remember about API and web UI is that when you run it, there is an API key, which is automatically generated for a random key, and you need to make sure you copy it into your clipboard and then paste it when you use web UI. Again, why it is important: because there is no username password authentication in Nettacker. It is all done using the API key. Nettacker's web UI looks like this. I'm actually, rather than showing it to you on the slides, I'm going to try to do a live demo again now. So let me switch to not BlackArch. I want to switch to Kali Linux. All right, there you go. Here is my Nettacker running in Kali Linux. So let me run, I'll use Python 3. Nettacker in API mode. What do I need to do? I just have to say Nettacker --start API. What happens now is we get a screen which pauses, right? Why is it pausing? Because it is actually launching a Flask web server. It warns us that this is a development server. Do not use it in production deployment. Because it's Flask. And you can see it generated this API key for us. So I'm going to copy that API key. And you can see that Nettacker is telling us that it's running on the HTTPS 127.0.0.1.5000 because that is the default host and the port number. Let's open our Firefox, is our web browser inside Kali Linux, and let's try to connect to our Nettacker using a web browser. Right, so here it is, 127.0.0.1.5000. Okay, the first thing, of course, what we're going to get is the browser warning about the self-signed SSL certificate, because by default, Nettacker's certificate is self-signed. You can, of course, load your own certificate if you've got your own trusted certificate authority, and you would like to use that with Nettacker. Otherwise, we're just going to say advanced, and yes, we accept the risk because we want to connect to our UI using a web browser. And there you go. This is what OWASP Nettacker web UI looks like. As you can see, we just have information about Nettacker, links to GitHub and OWASP webpage. There's a button called tutorial, which basically just tells us what to click on and what different buttons do. However, if I click on any other buttons like crawler, results, or new scan, we get please log in first, and we get the Nettacker logo, you know, this little radar scan thing rotating, saying, oh, you can't do anything, you have to log in. But how do we log in? There is no username and password. We have an API key. So let's paste that API key that we gathered when we launched Nettacker. Now it says success, your session is updated. So what can we do? So the first thing that we can do is we can run a scan. So this is what Nettacker's web UI looks like if we want to scan from the web UI. This is much, much easier than running it from the command line. So again, it says, okay, please enter a target. And I can go and say, oh yeah, I want to define OWASP.org, press enter, and I have a target. It says, oh, I can actually add another target and say, oh yeah, can I have 192.168.132.176 as my next target? Yep, now we have two targets. Then it says, okay, profiles. Which profiles would you like to use? And you can see they are color-coded. So for example, if I click on the vulnerability profile, you can see all the vuln modules which are color-coded red, they all light up. If I choose scan profile, that tells me that scan just uses all the scanning profile, which are color-coded green, and the brute forcing profiles are color-coded orange. We can also define which graphs we want to use. So okay, I want to use a D3. I want to scan my OWASP.org and this IP address. And yeah, I want to use a port scan, for example. Yeah, and then I can go and say, okay, you can choose a different language. Actually recently presented Nettacker at OWASP Indonesia and OWASP Latam, and showing how you can switch the language to the Indonesian one or to Spanish. And basically what it does is just generates the report in the local language. There's an output file name where it will go by default. So if we click on the submit, oh, it says please input correct target. There was a, I think this was a space. Was there a space there? Let me delete the IP address with a space. Yep. Yeah, and obviously this happens when the scan starts. The request gets submitted into the API, and then it starts scanning. So this is one type of scans. Let me now select some other modules. You see, so we're doing a port scan, but we can also do the same thing what we did before. I run, for example, a server version vulnerability, if you remember, with X powered by vulnerability. Why I'm choosing the same scans? Because I want to show you that in the web UI, it's much, much easier to do. You just tick the boxes next to which modules you want. And again, you can define your own profiles, which will be displayed here, or just use the default ones. In the web UI, you actually notice there is another tab called Advanced. And on this tab, you will find the option called Check Subdomains, which corresponds to -s in the command line tool. That basically tells us to run whatever modules we want to run here for all the subdomains of the target, right? And there are some other options here. So, for example, how many threads, how many threads per host, how many retries, and the time to sleep between the attempts. If we were running port scan, you can also define the port numbers using a range or a list them. Another important thing about Nettacker that I forgot to mention, and you can see it here, it can run through a SOCKS proxy. So you can do some funky things that are like scanning through a Tor network if you want. And of course, another thing is that you, if you don't have direct access to your target, you can scan through a proxy server. For brute forcing, there's users and passwords here. So these are the credentials that you want to try for brute forcing. You will also notice there's some extra module options. So these are the various options available for each of the modules. You can see that most of them are things like port numbers. You can see this is the ports which are used by port scan. What they mean, you can just check documentation on individual module if you want. Okay, so if I submit this scan, this will be the second scan I've done with the web UI. This should now do a subdomain scan of OWASP.org with server version and XPower byte headers. Where do we see the results? There is a results button here. And if I click on it, you will see all the results of all the previous scans that I ran. So you can see the last scan that was run here. And you can see that it was run through OWASP Nettacker API. You can see that this was a port scan. Yeah, remember we did run a port scan. And let me see if I can reload the page. And now there is another one, another scan which come through, which is basically the XPowered by and the server version one. So that is how easy you can access the scans. Now, this is from the web UI, but if I keep scrolling, you will notice that there are some other scans available. So for example, this is what I run using command line. And you can see that if previously it said through the OWASP Nettacker API, that's the port scan that I performed here, but this was run using the command line. And remember, I mentioned that everything is saved in a database. So this scan is in the database. So I can just click on it, and you can see this is the one that I actually run using CSV output rather than a, see, there's a report output using CSV. But this one was HTML. So if I click on it, I will get the same graph. Yeah, and you can see nothing is lost. The scan is still available. And what is cool about this, for example, even though the scan was run as HTML, I can still download the results of the scan using CSV or JSON format. So you just click on Get CSV and says, there you go. How would you like to save your report? Click OK, and it downloads me a CSV file, which hopefully I can just click and open using LibreOffice and get my lovely spreadsheet from a scan that I ran some time ago. So that is what's really cool about this feature. About web UI. You can see all the previous scans are here. What also is important about this, why web UI is so cool, that we have a search engine. We have a crawler, and you can search all the results, previously scanned results. And for example, if I remember, there was something with Atlassian at OWASP.org. Okay, so if I go and search for Atlassian, we will find those two servers which were running in Atlassian. So essentially, you can use Nettacker as your internal network's showdown, right? Or if you use it for penetration testing, you can use it as a penetration testing kind of showdown database where all the results of all the previous scans are available to you, and you can extract them from the database at any time. Again, you need to make sure that you log in because there is an API key that you need. Okay, let me just show you now something else. Just quickly switch back to my presentation. Again, you've seen the Nettacker web UI. You've seen how easy it is to run. But what is also very cool about Nettacker is that you can achieve this amazing state of nirvana of being able to scan your network very, very quickly using Docker, right? So you don't even have to install anything. You can just clone the Nettacker from GitHub and then just run one command, Docker compose up, and that will bring up the wonderful web UI. So if you want to apply Nettacker in your organization, in your company, I'm pretty sure people after this presentation will want to do that. All you have to do is just to use Docker, right? So let's try this. So you need to have Docker Compose installed. I think I have it on my Kali Linux here. So look, I just have Docker Compose up. Oh, it reminded me that I don't have a super user privileges to run Docker. I'll use sudo. Right, and you can see now we're getting OWASP Nettacker in Docker container. We have a different API key. You can see this is how quickly you can get Nettacker running in your own network. It's now listening on port 5000. I'm just going to go browse and connect to it. All right, again, same IP address. Okay, I think I have the same problem I had before when I pause my Kali Linux. It's breaks the Docker network. But yeah, that's essentially the issue here. But the actual Docker run is just as simple as this, and obviously it's exactly the same running it in Docker if you run it using the API. Again, why is it useful? Is because you don't need to install any of the dependencies. You can just run it like that, and it's exactly the same if you were to run it using --start API. So that is why Docker is so cool, and you very quickly can have it up and running. And then once it is inside your browser, you can start performing scans and downloading them in spreadsheet format straight from your browser. That's how it is done. Okay, so that is about the Docker version. Again, I know quite a few people who use this. There is actually quite a large organization in the UK, which is a big consulting company. What they did actually use Nettacker to basically scan all the networks and scan all the hosts, and then they use the web UI as a search engine and to help them identify all the assets that they have. That's why it is so cool. So I showed to you an OWASP.org. Let me try to show you some of the other attacks that you can do with Nettacker. One of them that I want to show you is brute forcing. Okay, so what is cool about Nettacker? That you can use 8 different brute forcing modules. One of them is SSH. I will show you how to use it on SSH. To use SSH brute force, you need to, again, define your target. So I'm going to scan my local network. So I'm going to scan 192.168.132.0/24. So this is 255 addresses on my local network, on my home network. And I want to find if I have any devices on my network which try to brute force them and try to identify if any of them have admin as default credentials. In order to do this, I just have to call SSH brute module, and I have to define a username admin and a password admin as credentials that I want to try to brute force with. Okay, so about these parameters. So if you don't specify username and password, Nettacker will use its own internal dictionary. I think it has about a handful of some sample usernames and passwords. You can, of course, load them from the external file. So for example, if I want to brute force admin, I will keep my username as admin, but the password, instead of using lowercase, which means literal password, if I change it from lowercase to uppercase, that will allow me to load the passwords from a dictionary, right? And I can just load it from a text file. Again, don't forget that in Kali Linux, you get quite a lot of password dictionaries by default, and you can just run them all like that. And the same thing, what you can do is actually, you can do the same thing with usernames. So if you want to run your usernames, if you want to run your brute forcing attack using dictionary of usernames, you can load them all from the usernames.txt as file as well. Again, that can be any external text file containing usernames. So that's how easy it is to do brute forcing. However, in this case, I actually want to check if anything on my network, right, actually does have credentials of admin, and that is 256 addresses. To speed this up, because obviously what Nettacker is going to do is going to try to connect to every single IP address on this network, and it's going to try to connect using SSH, and it's going to try to log in with this username and this password, and then move on to the next target. Of course, that will be slow. To speed this up, I can try to increase the number of threads using the -t and -m parameter. So let me just try to use the -m parameter and have it as 800. And you can see it starts now, and it now is trying to connect to all the IP addresses on the network. And you can see that it's failed to log in, and now it's skipping, and you can see that it's launched 256 processes in memory to try to do all this SSH brute forcing in one go. And you can see it's almost done, but there was one hit. There you go. You can see this device on my network, and you can see how quickly Nettacker managed to scan 256 IP addresses and find one host on my network, which actually it managed to log in using admin, and that was this specific IP address, 91.68.132.176. I get the message, it was logged in successfully. So that is how brute forcing is done, and this is why we have the username and password here. Okay, and one other thing that I want to show you with Nettacker, which I haven't shown you before, I want to show you a different target. I'm going to show you something on Uber. Again, the reason why I use Uber, because I'm allowed to scan it. According to Uber's bug bounty program, security researchers are allowed to perform security scans within the limitation of the bug bounty policy. I chose Uber. Uber is an interesting example because it has lots of subdomains. It literally has hundreds of them. So one of the cool things about Uber is because it has so many subdomains. Let's have a look at them all. Subdomain scan. I think at least 400 subdomains exist there. Of course, subdomain. I have to spell it correctly. What's gonna Okay, this time Nettacker is going to think for a while. Okay, why does this happen? Because of course it needs to discover lots of subdomains of this organization, but this is of course a big enterprise. You can see 799 domain names were discovered, but this was still relatively quick. Check this out. There's all the subdomains of uber.com. But another cool thing, of course, remember that what we could do with Nettacker, we can also do things like server version vuln, for example, right? And we can go and server version vuln, we can check the web server banners. And if we add -s parameter, it's going to go through every single subdomain of Uber, all the 800 of them, and you can see how quickly it goes through Uber and discovers all the web servers and what they're running, which is actually quite interesting for bug bounty engagements because you can see what they've got, and you can see some of them are running Nginx, which is quite interesting. I think I just saw Apache in one of them as well. Yeah, if you find something like IIS with a version number, that would be quite interesting again. Both for penetration testing engagement, for your bug bounty work, but also if you're using it inside your organization. The great thing about Nettacker is that you can use it for scanning your network externally and internally. So you can discover, for example, all your subdomains and do external reconnaissance. You can discover all the open ports externally, all the vulnerabilities and leaking information in the headers externally, but you can also do it internally. And internally, you can perform your scans not on subdomains, not just on subdomains. You can also do it on your internal network ranges, which is, of course, very, very cool feature of Nettacker. So there you go. You can see that even for a very large organization with over 800 externally facing assets, Nettacker is able to perform the scan, and once it's finished, we will be able to get our spreadsheet And of course, that is a very, very useful feature. But there's one other thing that I want to show you. I'm actually going to interrupt this because I'm running short of time. Is what I know that well, there are several servers at Uber which are running WordPress, and we don't have any WordPress on OWASP.org. That's why I cannot show it to you there. But on Uber, there are a couple of servers which are running WordPress. So I'm going to showcase you two WordPress scanning modules that we have in Nettacker. Let me just interrupt the scan. Yep, I want to interrupt this. The modules are, so there is a module which is called WordPress plugin scan. So what this module does, it basically checks if the target, I'm going to use uber.com as a target because I know this site is running WordPress. Again, how do I find out? I can run my subdomain scan using CMS detection scan. So how I found out about this particular one, because I run CMS detection scan on uber.com on all the subdomains, and I found this particular subdomain. So again, all I do, I just use Nettacker. Okay, but trust me, this one is running WordPress. I want to show you how to discover if the site is running any WordPress plugins which had previously reported vulnerabilities. So it's already patched on this particular hosted Uber. So this is not a 0-day. I'm just showing to you how you can scan this. So WordPress plugin scan is using, again, a dictionary of WordPress plugin names which previously had any vulnerabilities in them. There are two different lists. There's like a short list and there's a long list of plugins, which allows you to discover all of them. And there you go. You can see discovered a plugin called Table Press. You can see there, and you can see the location where it was discovered. There was a 200 OK. And let me now try another WordPress site, which is located at Uber, and that is Newsroom, because I think on Newsroom there is a different set of plugins running. Let's see if it discovers it there. Again, what is Nettacker currently doing now? It's running through a dictionary of all the plugins that previously had reported vulnerabilities. You can see it discovered two of them. It discovered Aximet, and it discovered all-in-one SEO pack on newsroom.uber.com. And one other module I want to show you about WordPress is WordPress user enum scan. Okay, what this will try to do, it will try to enumerate the users. Why is this important? Again, WordPress is usually used for, of course, publicly facing websites, blogs, and things like that. And of course, there are usernames there. However, what happens is that some companies create usernames on their WordPress sites which are exactly the same as the username for that user on the network. And again, that can tell a penetration tester or a bug bounty hunter, gives them Recon information about what they logins look like. So you can see there are some names here. I can see these are the usernames which all appear to be valid usernames on Uber network. So that's why this is such an important plugin, and that's why I wanted to tell you about it. Right, let's talk about a few other things inside Nettacker. So you've seen that Nettacker is using database. By default, it is using SQLite database, which is bundled with it, so you don't have to install anything. However, if you're going to use it in your enterprise, you probably are going to want to have something a little bit beefier than SQLite. And Nettacker currently supports MySQL and Postgres databases. You can configure Nettacker to work with those databases, and that's documented in Nettacker Wiki here. So again, I know quite a few organizations which are using this on the network, and they use MySQL or Postgres, and they allow their internal pen testers, the internal red team, to search through Nettacker database. That is also quite useful just generally for your IT, because your IT department now knows all their assets. Another feature of Nettacker which exists, but I'm not going to talk about this because I'm running out of time, is Maltego transforms. So Maltego is a tool which is available in Kali Linux, so you can download it separately, which is a quite useful reconnaissance tool. And Nettacker has transforms for Maltego, which is basically plugins which allow the use of Nettacker modules inside Maltego. And here's how you can see the example on the screenshots, how you can use the same scan that I ran. So on OWASP.org as a target, you can just right click, and these are all the Nettacker transforms available. And here's an example how you can run, for example, a subdomain scan. So it shows them in a format. Of course, the cool thing about Maltego is that you can include them in other investigations. You can move this graph, you can add other metadata, and it is generally quite useful for the your Recon work. Another thing I want to tell you about is Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, which were sweeping the entire information security industry in March. If you remember, everyone was talking about Microsoft Exchange Server flaws in March, proxy logon vulnerability, which was exploited by Hafnium attacker group, which was attributed to China. Actually, this is the announcement in March. So I think the entire month of March, everyone working in InfoSec was busy trying to patch the Exchange servers. And one thing that we've done in Nettacker, we released a module which is actually helping to detect the Microsoft Exchange Server vulnerability, which is CV 2021-26855. And this is my tweet about it. This is what the module looked like. I actually created a blog post as well on my blog about this, because this was very important back in day to deliver this tool to the community, so people could use free and open source tool to scan their networks for any Microsoft Exchange servers which had the vulnerability. This is what the tool looked like when you run it in Nettacker, and you can see an example of a particular host having this vulnerability. And just like any other module, it was displayed here, and you can see description was set to vulnerable to Exchange Server SSRF vulnerability, and that's how you would run it. So I received thanks from a bunch of people at a small European country, which had their own national cybersecurity team using OWASP Nettacker to scan all the countries' IP address ranges, and they discovered all the Exchange servers with this CV vulnerability. And I received a great email from them saying, thank you very much for this great free and open source tool, which helped us save the whole country. So I think this is pretty cool. And the next similar vulnerability was in 2020. If you remember, there are actually a couple, and there was a Pulse and there was a Citrix as well. Citrix was quite an important one as well, because lots of companies use Citrix VPNs and Citrix devices in the perimeter. And there was a vulnerability allowing attackers to hack into the Citrix VPN devices. Yeah, same thing. Basically, Nettacker had the module available to scan the network and discover quite quickly any vulnerable service. And again, when it was finding the vulnerabilities, this is what it looked like. You know, the module name is Citrix CV 2019-19781. So summarize some Nettacker use case examples. You can use Nettacker for asset discovery, so internal, external assets, or you can use it to discover your shadow IT. Do you know what people spin up in Amazon or spin up on your network? Nettacker can help you find it. You can scan your network for open ports, for web service and hosts, default credentials. I showed you how to scan for admin, how to scan your network for specific vulnerability. For example, Microsoft Exchange CV that I just showed, you can scan the whole network or the whole country if you want. You can monitor your subdomains and open ports on the subdomains. You can discover expired SSL certificates in your IP ranges, and you can find some domains hosting vulnerable versions of content management systems such as WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. Because Nettacker is an OWASP an open source tool, everyone is welcome to contribute. If you would like to contribute to the tool and you know Python, before you do that, please read developer wiki and the contributor guidelines, which are all available on our wiki page here. And just click on the contributor guidelines, and you will be able to see the requirements to pull requests that the Nettacker project team introduces. And I think this is it. So yes, go and attack your network before the real attackers do. I'm now open to questions.
Wow, just wow. I'm the fact that it's technically not officially, full release. It seems incredibly full featured. But as you can imagine, we have a few questions. And one of them, there's a couple of questions directly around the database. In that, Nice asks, are you able to delete, clean up the database after a scan? And what I like about this question is sometimes if you're in engagement, the client wants all the raw data for their own teams. And this might be some way to export this for something for, that client to consume. So I'm wondering, and compartmentalize it across different scans so client A doesn't see client B work. And so I'm wondering how you might be able to achieve that.
Unfortunately, you cannot do this at the moment because the only compartmentalization that you can do is just using the scan IDs. So if you want to, well, one of the options you have is just basically run several instances of Nettacker in Docker or different databases. But by default, everything goes into one big database. So it's one big pot of data. And of course, it's searchable. But yeah, it's I don't think you can structure it separately. And what I usually do, for example, to separate the pen testing engagement from bug bounty work, I just use it different instances of it. And by default, it's using SQLite. So if you install it in different folders, right? So you have a copy of OWASP Nettacker in folder client A and another copy of Nettacker in folder called client B. You can use them, keep them separate. But there is no other isolation available, unfortunately.
Cool.
Pretty anyway. Next question actually comes from me. And that was, say I have an old Raspberry Pi 2B sitting around collecting dust. Is there a minimum requirements to actually run Nettacker?
So if it can run Python 2, yeah, I think that's all you need, really. Some of the dependencies might not install, so please check them. But generally, I did try it on an older Raspberry Pi with Python 2, and it worked.
Perfect.
Awesome. Another question we had, if I can find it here, is how often are the feeds or the modules or the methods?
Very good question. I always get this question. Again, you need to understand that it because Nettacker is run by a whole bunch of volunteers and it's written by students, it is not that frequent. Of course, everyone's welcome to contribute. We are now changing the Nettacker module structure. So rather than them being written in Python, they will be based around YAML templates. That means we will be able to release modules much, much quicker. So usually, if there is something like a critical vulnerability, as you've seen in the examples with, for example, Citrix or Microsoft Exchange, I usually just code myself this emergency modules which we can distribute. There were a couple of similar modules which were coded by students as well. However, unfortunately, it is not that frequent. So it is not a replacement for your commercial tool. However, if you are a small startup, and not necessarily a small startup who cannot afford a commercial tool, even there are lots of organizations with over 50,000 employees which use Nettacker because it has a specific advantages. So it's not... Currently, yeah, I wouldn't say so. Basically, there is no schedule and there is no commercial commitment because, of course, it's a free and open source tool, fully supported by volunteers. But yes, if you would like to contribute and help us with modules, especially in the next version when it will be much easier to write because it will be YAML template based. Yes, definitely do help us out.
Yeah, we just got a quick update from Clayton, who said that even the older Raspberry Pi boards run the latest and greatest Raspberry Pi OS. So the dependency...
Wait, are you supposed to keep your Raspberry Pi up to date?
What? I'm thinking, so I'm wondering if you have, and this is my own question, I have a particular client who has a lot of factories with a lot of IoT. I'm wondering if you
Yes.
I'm wondering if you have particular examples that would be useful, like either through your wiki or whatever, for those particular kinds of things that you would look at an engagement like that.
Yes. So first thing would be, of course, to discover all the open ports on the IoT devices. Again, you can run it across all the IP ranges. Then you discover the all the web servers. But there's one module which I didn't demo, which is a directory scan module, and that is directory brute forcing. So that helped me find lots of things like abandoned backup files on some of the Chinese manufacturers' IoT devices, which left not just default credentials, but some backup files with some juicy data. So yeah, that is the important one. Another one was some of the FTP. You see, there's a whole bunch of the BFTP daemon vulnerabilities. And again, I found some IoT devices which had the that particular vulnerable version of FTP. And of course, they brute forcing. So again, if you want to go, if you know what the default credentials are, how can you quickly scan thousands of devices in the factory and find out if you do have something with admin or admin password 123, whatever the default credentials are. So it makes perfect sense.
Good old FTP, the 1990s called. They want their service back.
Exactly, exactly.
Got a good. We're really, impressed by your bravery and courage on running live demos. So we got.
Yeah, something did go wrong, which it went wrong during my previous demo, and I thought I fixed it. But again, this is something about Docker and network. But trust me, Docker works. And again, if you just do it on a fresh VM with or just fresh Docker install, yeah. So I always like to do live demos. And again, because during the Q&A session like this, anyone can ask to run a particular thing, and I will happily do it. There was one interesting question which was asked at my previous presentation. Someone who is probably like an IT manager for a company, he said, "Sam, this is a scary tool." And he was saying, how can I protect from it? Does it leave some sort of signature? It's like, is there like a user agent string? Is it like OWASP Zap or Nmap? Can I configure some sort of rules to stop it, stopping enumerating my assets? And I said, well, actually, no, because Nettacker actually has a mechanism where it randomly selects a user agent from a dictionary. So every single request that Nettacker makes to hit your network, it's going to have a random user agent. So detecting it is not that easy. There is no predefined user agent. So we didn't have like, what's Nettacker version 002 in the signature. No, because we knew it's going to get blocked, right? It's going to interfere with our reconnaissance mission. So the only way to protect from it, and this is my response, if you have a web application firewall which has a bot detection, a bot protection based on JavaScript, that's what you would use. So something like, for example, Cloudflare free version will work just as good, or anything displaying a captcha. So basically something which responds to an HTTP request with a JavaScript challenge, asking people whether to solve a captcha or to move their mouse or touch a keyboard. I think almost all modern web application firewalls have that feature. Otherwise, yeah, every single request is different, and it's not going to be easy to detect.
Good.
So we haven't even talked about proxy chains.
Exactly. Yeah. And don't forget, it supports SOX proxy. It can hit you from Tor or from any proxy.
Well,
I can confirm that the Docker instructions work, since I, while you were demoing it, pulled it up on my desktop. And I'm actually quite impressed by the subdomain scanning, because it found a bunch of, like, I ended up with my personal domain, and it found some weird ones that like wouldn't show up in a dictionary, but it found them. I'm like, oh, it's pretty neat.
Yeah.
You have your own shadow IT.
yeah. I am my own shadow IT. I have like 10 domain names.
Excellent. Yeah, but don't forget, you can also use it internally, right? So it's great for both external recon and internal recon. Because, of course, people can use sites like Showdown, for example, or Census. There are lots of these sites available now, which can show you let's say the external attack surface, right? Or what is visible from the outside. But you don't know how frequently the sites are updated. For some of them, you have to pay, right? And it's not real time. So, using Nettacker, it will actually scan straight away and will tell you what do you have right now, what open ports you have right now, what service you have right now, which web service you have running right now, which ones respond on port 80443, or maybe some weird port if you perform a port scan. So it's just there. And of course, some people said who are like people who are like experienced and seasoned pen testers say, oh, sure, but I've got all these tools available, so I can use like Dirbuster or Dirb for directory brute forcing, or a subfinder or sublister, or even OWASP Mass for subdomain discovery, and I can use Nmap for scanning, or something like Ncrack for brute forcing. I said, yes, but they are all different tools, and you have to have them installed. You need to know how to use them. You need to learn all the options, all their parameters. You need to then know how to bring together all the results from them. Nettacker doesn't need all that. It doesn't even need any of these tools installed, because someone said, oh, do I need to have like Nmap installed? I said, no, you don't need to install anything at all. You just need to have Python, and you need to have some prerequisites like your OpenSSL library, and there's like curl that you need to install, but it's just the library. So it's the Python curl to use PyCurl. And again, that is actually the thing which most frequently breaks Nettacker installation, the PyCurl library. And again, you don't need it. For example, curl is only needed if you're going to do brute forcing using NTLM. And yeah, you can just disable it from the requirements if you're having issues with it, or just use the Docker version. So you don't need any other external tools, and you can see how quick it is. And it's literally like 5 megabyte download the whole thing. And then you just say Docker compose up and it's running.
Awesome. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll take this opportunity to thank you for sharing this most amazing tool. I think I'm going to be spending some serious quality time with it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, and enjoy the tool. It's amazing. Since I started using it, it's my world's changed. And of course, everyone who starts using it, they love it, because it is the ease of use. So you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a pen tester. And using web UI, it's literally one command to bring up the Docker container, and then start scanning your network, your targets. And with command line tool, you can integrate it. You can even add it to things like CI/CD pipelines. You can run it on the cron, on the schedule. And I have people basically do daily scans or nightly scans, and they ditched their commercial scanner, and they just started using Nettacker, because if all you do is just scan for open ports, web service. There was another thing that I didn't show you, which was Wapalizer, right? And Wapalizer is another cool module that you can see. It shows you all the technologies which I use. Let me just quickly show you. Definitely check out Wapalizer. So again, I'm going to use back to live demo. I'm not going to use Uber. I'm going to show OWASP. Okay, so OWASP.org. Of course, you can use your own domain, or you can put IP ranges, or you can define a text file with all your assets. But if you use this wonderful module, which is called Wapalizer Scan, you're probably aware of the Wapalizer. But here you can use it on all the subdomains of your target. And it's going to tell us all about all the programming languages, all the technologies, and everything that it can find on every single target. And that's what's great about Wapalizer. So definitely do check it out.
And Wapalizer doesn't need an API key or anything like that.
It doesn't need any API key, and it works internally. See, there you go. It told us straight away that OWASP.org is using GitHub Pages, Cloudflare, FastACDN, jQuery, Ruby on Rails, Google Font API. You see Varnish. There you go. You see, it's fantastic. And the fact that you can use it internally inside your networks and just scan your 10 whatever internal IP range and discover everything that you have inside, it's amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. And of course, you see, you can speed it up by adding threads. So unlike some other tools which are a bit unkind to your network. So for example, a lot of people ban Nmap, because I know people who actually had their switches burned by Nmap scans. Nettacker is not that bad, because you can control the threads, and the default settings are pretty gentle. So there you go. You can see this is Wapalizer scan on all the assets, and you can see everything that OWASP uses as an organization, and every single subdomain, right? So you can see all of it. So it's an awesome module. I definitely urge you to check it out and use it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. This has been amazing, and I'm sure we'll be in touch as we start to use Nettacker, and we start to follow the path of Nettacker.
Excellent. Thanks very much for having me. So I'm always open to questions. So yeah, if you remember something that you forgot to ask, you can always email me or just connect with me on Twitter. I will always be happy to help.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks again. And thanks everyone for joining us. Of course, you'll be able to see the video later in our YouTube channel, and we'll be around on all the usual socials and our Slack. So thanks again to Sam, and we'll look forward to talking to Sam at some point in time in the future with our Nettacker questions.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a
Good
pleasure.
night.